30 years. That's roughly how long it took humanity to live through more technological change than in the previous 10,000 years combined. And the strangest part isn't that, it's that the speed of change is itself accelerating. You probably feel it, even without naming it. That vertigo that the world is changing too fast, that you barely understand one new thing and three more arrive. This isn't your imagination, and it isn't just because you're getting older. It's a real feature of the historical moment you were born into. In the previous episodes of this cycle, I dissected 4 forces, one at a time. The artificial intelligence that thinks and coordinates, the robots entering the home, the science targeting aging, and the energy that sustains it all. In this episode, the last of the cycle, I won't bring a 5th force. I'll show you something deeper and more unsettling. Why all of them are exploding exactly now, at the same time, and what it means to live well in the middle of the greatest acceleration in history. Because the real story isn't any of the 4 forces alone, it's the fact that they're happening together and accelerating each other. And to understand that, you need to understand the most counterintuitive thing about how the world changes. Let's start with the deepest flaw in our intuition, because it explains almost all the confusion about the future. The human brain thinks linearly, but technology advances exponentially, and those two things are radically different. Linear is taking 30 steps, 1, 2, 3, and you've walked 30 meters. Exponential is doubling 30 times, 1, 2, 4, 8. And after 30 doublings, you haven't walked 30 meters, you've circled the globe billions of times. There's a classic thought experiment that shows this. Imagine a pond with a lily pad that doubles in size every day. If it covers the whole pond on day 30, on what day was the pond half covered? Imagine, intuition screams 15. The answer is 29. On day 29, the pond is only half covered, and it looks like there's plenty of time. The next day, it's all covered. That's how exponential change deceives. For a long time it seems slow, almost nothing happens, and then, suddenly, everything happens at once. We spent decades at the very start of the computing curve, where everything seemed distant. Now we're beginning to enter the steep part, where each doubling is gigantic. And our linear brain, trained on the savannah to predict the path of a thrown stone, simply wasn't built to feel this. That's why the future catches us by surprise, even when the data was right there. Wait, because there's something worse than one exponential curve. If a single exponential curve is already hard to imagine, now hold this. We don't have just one. We have several, rising at the same time. Computing power rises exponentially. The amount of data rises exponentially. The capability of artificial intelligence rises exponentially. The speed of genetic sequencing, which drives longevity science, plummeted in cost exponentially. Each of these alone would already be enough to transform the world. But they aren't alone, and that's where the secret of this whole episode lies. The curves feed each other. More powerful artificial intelligence accelerates the research that improves chips, which in turn make artificial intelligence even more powerful. AI accelerates biology, which extends life, which creates pressure for more technology. The robots need AI, which needs energy, whose research is accelerated by AI. It's a system of curves pushing each other upward, in a self-reinforcing loop. When several exponentials connect and accelerate, the result isn't their sum. It's something more explosive, an acceleration of acceleration itself. And it's exactly this phenomenon, rare and perhaps unique in history, that we're living now. Watch why. It's not one revolution. It's several, at the same time, turbocharging each other. And that changes what it means to simply be alive at this moment. A fair question is, why is all this happening now, in your life, and not 100 or 1,000 years ago? The answer is that some things had to accumulate until they crossed an invisible threshold. Think of a reaction that needs critical mass. For a long time, nothing happens. The ingredients keep gathering until suddenly the reaction ignites. It was roughly that. We needed enough computing power, which only arrived now after decades of silent doublings. We needed an absurd amount of data, which only existed after the whole world got connected. We needed algorithms that only matured recently. When these pieces, which had been growing separately and slowly, finally met, the reaction began. And here's the dizzying point. You weren't born at just any moment of history. You were born by pure accident of the calendar, exactly in the decade when these curves crossed the threshold and the reaction ignited. The overwhelming majority of humans who ever lived spent their entire lives in a world that changed slowly, almost imperceptibly, from generation to generation. You're living in a window where the world changes visibly from year to year, sometimes month to month. That's extremely rare. And being rare has a psychological cost nobody warned you about. But first, we need to face what this acceleration does to us on the inside. That feeling that the world is accelerating too much, that you can't keep up, that you barely learned something and it's already changed, has a cause and a name. It isn't weakness nor a lack of intelligence. It's the natural friction between a brain that evolved for a stable world and a reality that changed regime. For almost all of human history, the world you died in was basically the same one you were born in. The tools, the jobs, the rules, all lasted generations. The human brain was shaped for that world, learned the rules once, in youth, and used them for a lifetime. The Great Acceleration breaks exactly that. The rules you learn at 20 can be obsolete at 40. The safe profession becomes uncertain. Knowledge ages before you do. And the brain, expecting stability, feels this as a constant threat, a background anxiety many people carry without understanding where it comes from. Notice how everything we saw in this cycle worsens it. The artificial intelligence changing work, the robots changing the home, the science changing lifespan. They're all changes to the foundations, and all at the same time. The collective vertigo of our era isn't drama. It's the honest emotional response of a linear mind thrown into an exponential reality. And recognizing this is the first step to not drowning in it. Because there are ways to navigate the curve, and ways to be swallowed by it. Faced with a giant wave, there are basically two reactions, and they define who thrives and who suffers in an era of acceleration. The first is to try to hold the wave back, to resist, to pretend it isn't coming, to cling to the world that's passing. Whoever does this gets dragged, because the wave doesn't ask permission. It's the person who refuses to learn the new, who bets everything will go back to how it was, and who wakes up one day in a world they don't recognize, and that doesn't recognize them. The second reaction is to learn to surf, to accept that the wave exists, to stop fighting the water, and to use its own force to move. Surfing the acceleration doesn't mean chasing every novelty, exhausted. That's another way of drowning. It means developing a different relationship with change, treating it as the permanent climate, not as a passing storm. Concretely, it's cultivating the few things that don't go obsolete, even when everything changes. The ability to learn fast, judgment, adaptability, deep human relationships. Notice that these are exactly the skills that appeared, episode after episode, as the ones that resist. Not what you know, but the speed at which you relearn. Not execution, but discernment. It's no coincidence. In a world that accelerates, the only stable anchor is your ability to change with it. And that shift in posture starts with a mental decision. Let me flip the coin, because the acceleration isn't only a threat, it's also a frightening historical privilege. Think about it. Of the hundreds of billions of humans who ever existed, the overwhelming majority lived lives in which almost nothing changed. They were born and died in the same world, with the same tools, the same possibilities. You're among the tiny fraction that will witness, in a single life, transformations that once took eras. You can see intelligence stop being a human monopoly, physical labor leave our backs, medicine target aging itself. That is, on a historical scale, an absurd spectacle to have a ticket to. There are generations of scientists and thinkers who died, dreaming of seeing a sliver of what you'll see for free, just for having been born now. Of course it comes with weight. Living on the curve is uncomfortable, demands constant adaptation, brings uncertainty. But trade places, for a moment, with someone from 1,000 years ago whose entire life was predictable, limited, and short, and the scale becomes clear. The acceleration robs us of stability, but gives us something almost nobody in history had: the chance to take part, consciously, in the greatest leap the species has ever made. The question isn't whether this is good or bad, it's that it's rare, it's yours, and it's happening now. And what you do with that ticket depends on a choice most people don't even realize they have. There's a silent choice each person makes in the face of acceleration, almost always without realizing they're choosing, and it determines almost everything. It's the choice between being passive or active in the face of change. Most people live technological transformation passively. It happens to them. An app appears, they use it. A rule changes, they adapt late. A job vanishes, they react in shock. They're objects of change, carried by the current, always a step behind, always surprised. The minority does the opposite. They treat change as something to be understood and anticipated, not just suffered. Not to predict the future exactly, which is impossible, but to see the directions, sense the curves, and position themselves before the crowd. The difference between the two groups isn't intelligence or luck, it's posture. It's the decision to become subject, not object, of one's own era. And here is, perhaps, the deepest thesis of this whole channel. In a world that changes slowly, you can live on autopilot, reacting. In a world that accelerates, autopilot is a sentence of irrelevance. The only way not to be run over by the acceleration is to become someone who thinks the future on purpose, who reads the signs, who crosses the domains and understands where it all points. It is, literally, the nexialist posture, and it's not a talent of the few, it's a choice available to anyone, but it requires facing one last uncomfortable truth about limits. Now, the part the acceleration enthusiasts tend to ignore. No curve rises forever. In nature, all exponential growth sooner or later hits a limit and becomes something else. Watch what happened with any unchecked growth. A bacteria population in a dish grows explosively until the food runs out. And our technological acceleration has real limits, some of which we saw in this very cycle. Energy is one. As we showed, artificial intelligence can run into the physics of available electricity. There are limits of raw materials, of chip physics, of society's capacity to absorb change without breaking. So it's quite possible the acceleration won't continue indefinitely, that it'll slow, or change form, or hit a ceiling we can't yet see. This is important to say, because the fantasy of an infinite, automatic acceleration is naive and, sometimes, dangerous. But notice the subtlety that matters for your life. Even if the acceleration has a ceiling far ahead, it doesn't seem close enough to spare you the transformation. Within the horizon of your life, rapid change is the most likely scenario, with or without a final limit. In other words, you don't need to believe in an endless technological explosion to take the acceleration seriously. You just need to recognize that, in the time you have left, the world will keep changing faster than your intuition expects. And this reopens the question of what, of everything, is worth holding on to. In the middle of so much changing at absurd speed, it's worth pausing and asking the opposite. What doesn't change? Because, paradoxically, in a world of acceleration, the things that remain become more valuable, not less. and there's a lot that's human that doesn't accelerate. The time a deep relationship takes to build is the same as 1,000 years ago. The need for meaning, to belong, to be loved, hasn't changed at all. The value of an unhurried meal, of a real conversation, of a sunset watched calmly, is exactly what it always was. Wisdom still takes a lifetime to mature. Caring for a child or an elder can't be accelerated without ceasing to be care. Notice something beautiful. While technology races, the core of human experience remains at an old, stable rhythm. And this points to an extremely powerful life strategy for the age of acceleration. Anchor yourself in what doesn't change so you can navigate what does. Whoever has deep roots in the human, in affection, in purpose, in the body, withstands winds that uproot those who don't. Technological acceleration makes it more urgent, not less, to care for these slow things. They're the ballast that keeps the vertigo from becoming a shipwreck. And here the nexialist lens closes a circle. The answer to a world that changes too fast isn't to run even faster. It's to know what must never run. Now let the nexialist lens join everything this cycle built, because this is where the pieces form the full picture. See the four forces no longer as separate themes, but as one single thing. Artificial intelligence gives the world a new kind of mind. The robots give that mind a body, which acts in the physical world, in your home. Aging reversal stretches the time each human has to live all of this. And energy is the fuel that makes the three turn: mind, body, time, and fuel. Together, they don't describe four technological novelties. They describe a transformation in the human condition itself. For millennia, human life had a stable shape. You were born, learned a craft, worked with body and mind, aged and died, all in a world that barely changed. The four forces attack, at the same time, each of those pillars. The machine takes over the work of mind and body. Science touches aging and dying. And energy decides the pace of it all. It's not one area of life changing. It's the entire outline of existence being redrawn at once. That's why the feeling is one of total vertigo, not of a single new thing. And that's why thinking about these forces in isolation, as the news does, hides the truth. Only when you see them converge, as in this cycle, does the real size of the moment appear, and what to do in the face of something so big fits, surprisingly, into a few attitudes. Faced with such a big transformation, the natural reaction is paralysis. If everything changes, and nobody knows exactly how, why try? But paralysis is the worst possible answer, because it hands you over, bound, to the current. What works isn't predicting the future, which is impossible, but having a compass that works in any scenario. And that compass has few points. First, bet on what pays off in every future. No matter which version of the future comes, knowing how to learn fast, think clearly, relate well, and adapt will pay off. They're safe bets in an uncertain world. Second, think in directions, not dates. Nobody knows when each thing arrives, but the direction of the four forces is clear enough for you to position yourself. Missing the date isn't serious. Ignoring the direction is. Third, stay anchored in what doesn't accelerate, as we saw, to have emotional stability while the rest moves. Fourth, be subject, not object. Decide to look at the future on purpose, instead of being surprised by it. Notice that none of this requires guessing or genius. It requires a posture, that of someone who faces the acceleration with open eyes, with humility before uncertainty and courage before change. This compass won't tell you where the world will stop, because it may not stop. But it tells you how to walk firmly even without a map. And that's exactly what separates those who flourish from those who merely survive in the Great Acceleration. Now let me argue honestly against my own theme, because thinking well requires doubting the enthusiasm, especially in an episode about acceleration. It's quite possible the Great Acceleration is less dramatic than the excitement suggests. First, history is full of moments that seemed the peak of change and later turned out to be normal. Every generation thinks it lives the most transformative era of all. Maybe our sense of vertigo is, in part, that old illusion again. Second, many of the curves that look exponential may, in fact, be S-curves in disguise, which will slow sooner than we imagine, as they hit limits like energy. Third, society has enormous inertia, even when technology races, laws, habits, and institutions hold back the real pace of change in people's lives, sometimes for decades. I take all of this seriously, and it's healthy to distrust anyone promising everything will change tomorrow. But notice the asymmetry that decides what you should do. If the acceleration is as big as it seems, whoever prepared gains a lot. If it's smaller, whoever prepared loses little, because the skills of adaptation and judgment pay off in any scenario. The bet on the nexialist posture is robust, precisely because it doesn't depend on the acceleration being extreme. You don't need to believe in the most radical scenario for thinking seriously about the future to be the smartest choice. And that leads us to the close of everything. So, in practice, what to do with your life knowing you're on the steep part of the curve? And I stress it's reasoning, not a recipe or advice for your case, but a few attitudes sum up everything this cycle showed. First, learn to learn and never stop. In a world that accelerates, your ability to relearn is the only asset that doesn't depreciate. Make curiosity a permanent habit, not a phase. Second, invest in what the machine doesn't do and time doesn't erode. Judgment, creativity, human connection, the capacity to give meaning. They're the anchors and the edge at the same time. Third, anchor yourself in what doesn't accelerate. Care for relationships, the body, purpose, the slow things that give ballast, because that's what keeps vertigo from becoming panic. Fourth, become subject. Stop merely reacting to the future and start looking at it on purpose, reading the directions, crossing the fields, positioning yourself ahead. That's the invitation of this whole channel. The Great Acceleration is neither a catastrophe nor a salvation. It's the tide of your era, and you don't choose whether it rises, only how you navigate it. You were born on the curve. Almost nobody in history had that ticket, with all the weight and all the privilege it carries. What you'll do with it isn't written anywhere. It depends entirely on you deciding to be pilot, not passenger, of your own era. You just took the helm. Now it's on you. So let me reveal what these two whole cycles really mean, with no hype and no alarm. It's a projection, not a prophecy. Across 10 episodes, we looked at artificial intelligence, robots, long life, the end of the diploma, the end of work, management by machines, the robot at home, aging reversal, energy hunger. It looked like a list of different subjects. But the truth that emerges when you overlay them is one, and it's vast. We are living through the greatest transformation of the human condition since we became a species that farms, writes, and builds. It's not rhetorical exaggeration. It's what appears when you join the curves. The mind, the body, work, lifespan, and energy, the most basic pillars of existence, are all being redrawn within the window of a single life, yours. And the most important thing this channel can tell you is this. This isn't something that happens to you. It's something you take part in. The future isn't a place you'll be carried to. It's something being built now, with choices, yours included. The Great Acceleration takes the old stability from you, but gives you in return something very few ever had: the chance to live, consciously, the most intense chapter in the history of the species. The vertigo is real. So is the privilege. And what to do with it, nobody decides for you. That's why this channel exists. Let's land, because such a big vision needs to become something you can carry. And I stress it one last time. Nothing here is financial, medical, or career advice. It's a map for you to think with. If there's a single thing to take from these two cycles, it's this: the future stopped being something distant you wait for and became something present you navigate. The forces we described aren't predictions for your grandchildren. They're arriving in your life now, at the same time, and accelerating. Faced with that, you have exactly two possible postures, and you have to truly choose one. You can be a passenger. Let the tide carry you. React in shock. Always be surprised. And grow old bewildered in a world that won't stop changing. Or you can be a pilot. Look at the curves on purpose. Cultivate what doesn't depreciate. Anchor in what doesn't accelerate. And navigate the transformation with open eyes. Both live the same acceleration. Only one lives it with a hand on the helm. This channel exists to give you that helm. Not ready answers, but the lens to read your own time. You were born on the curve, in the most dizzying and most extraordinary chapter a human being has ever had the chance to live. You can't get off it. But you can, and that's the only choice that matters, decide how you'll surf it. You just saw the whole curve. Now it's on you. Here on Nexialist Future, we don't recap the news, we project what it means for your life. This episode closes a second cycle of 4 forces. The AI that manages AI. The robot that lives in your home, aging reversal, and the energy hunger, all flowing into this single idea, the Great Acceleration. If you made it this far, watch the other episodes to see the whole picture. They're the pieces of this puzzle. Subscribe, hit the bell, and tell me in the comments, do you feel more like a passenger or a pilot of your era? Until the next cycle.